So as a technique of what can you do, it's true, you can simply watch. All the language really, in a way, is when we get to this place, when we speak about this, we bring attention to this, it's extremely simple. There's a line in the Tao Te Ching that says, the way is so simple that complicated minds cannot understand it. It is incredibly simple. But the agitation of the mind to want to like have something to do with it is the only real issue. Really, it is actually the agitation that is distracting. So also, words don't quite work because words are based in the agitation of the dualistic mind of the ego. I mean, language is all built in duality. So it takes you right to the edge. And then all there needs to be from the edge is seeing. And that is the same as relinquishing any positions whatsoever. When you're space, the only thing that is, I'm saying you are space. You are, there's a spatial metaphor. You are space. And so the only thing that's keeping you from being space is nothing, because you are space. But the only thing keeping the illusion that you're otherwise is fixation, is tension point, is grasping, is contraction. There's lots of words for it. And that grasping is happening in space and is actually the activity of space. But the seeing, the insight into grasping is the relinquishing of it. The strange thing is, even if there's grasping, you're still space. It's just that the relinquishing of grasping makes space obvious. Once space is obvious to you, then even if there's grasping, it still remains. It still remains as a recognition. It always remains even when it's not recognized, but in terms of recognition. What we're talking about, what your question is such a very pertinent red question, because what you're asking is like, what can I do? And the I there is the body and the mind, right? And in order to recognize consciousness or have consciousness be obvious. And that's what we're speaking of. It isn't actually that consciousness is attained, because it's already the case. You already are consciousness itself, always. But but the thing about it is, all of the language about it and the understanding about it is of the body and the mind. You could say it's all the rest of the mandala. It's all purple when you're describing it in terms of bliss or expanded feeling or whatever. That's all we're talking about, an energetic presence identity, really. And energetic presence identity, when it's fully expanded, is just what you're talking about when you say coming right to the edge. But there's not really a jump to red. Even though, in the mandala, I have it as a continuity. It's a continuity in terms of understanding, in terms of, it's useful to think that way. But in a certain sense, consciousness is it's all, you can't, language just doesn't do it. But there's a way in which, and that's why I love that phrase. It's a panacea, works well. There's a way in which consciousness is in a radical relationship to everything else. It's radical. It has nothing to do with it in some sense. And hence the whole big argument, Tantra, Advaita, Vedanta versus, same thing in Buddhism, Sutra versus Tantra. It's just, it's about what you're emphasizing. And when you emphasize distinction, like this rather than that, then there is just nothing that is arising, nothing in terms of the senses, nothing in terms of the mind, that is anything like consciousness. Consciousness is so beyond it. So it's sort of like saying there's a movie we go to a movie, and in the movie, the plot of the movie is these characters realize, and I saw a movie that was kind of like this, which was, what's it called? Something Cairo. It was an old movie. Anyway, where the characters, let's imagine the characters in the movie suddenly became one character and then another character and then a group of characters become aware that they are characters in a movie and that they're actually in the theater and that people are watching them. Well, what can the outcome of that movie be? It can only be them going at the end, look, there's people watching us and we're not real ultimately, and we're on a screen. But that doesn't make them come into the screen. It doesn't make them any more real in that sense. It doesn't somehow bridge that gap. They still remain characters. They still remain light and shadows. They still remain a process. Or if we, had a video thing where there was, like right now we can think of ourselves like we do. Like you think you're seeing me, but not really. What you're seeing is a screen and your own computer. Even though there is the sense that you're speaking to me, you're speaking to a piece of plastic and some lights and things like that. But that representation. Purple Rose of Cairo, very good, Margit. Thank you. She reminded me, sent me, it's a problematic movie because of the guy who made it. So I mean, but it was pretty good when it came out. Anyway, yes, the fact is that all of phenomenality is not, Shiva is not Shakti. That's why at the end they have just those two, Shiva and Shakti. Shakti, in the traditional language, the goddess, is everything. Everything you can imagine is contained in her. Everything subtle, everything dense. She is all of nature, and she is all of the subtle energy. So it's like if you were to take a super duper psychedelic, and before you did, you were in nature and you were enjoying the frogs and the trees and the birds and everything, all of nature. That's the goddess. And then as you were sitting there in the fields, it started becoming a vibrating, humming, multicolored, impressionist painting. And then that's the goddess too. And then if it continued to become more and more subtle, and it just felt like infinite love with all the colors were becoming just white light, that's the goddess too. So she is all of that. And the awareness of all of that is Shiva. Now in India, they like to speak about this in terms of an eternal couple, because there's never a time when he's not there. Never. And there's never a time when she's not there, especially if you talk about the white light and then it dissolves into infinite potentiality. She literally can disappear, but be there in potential. Shiva is invisible. And now in this moment, Shakti is invisible. The difference with Shakti, or the power of Shiva, is that power then moves and becomes subtle form again, becomes light, becomes all of nature and all of that, if we think of it in terms of time. We can also think of this like a not in time, but it's all happening at the same time. Like, even though there's gross matter here, simultaneously, if you had the eyes to see it, this is all energy. And if you had the eyes to see it, this is all pure potentiality. It's gone. So you can have a number of people in the room, you know, a woman of wisdom who is so awake that she sees it all in pure potentiality, and she says something like, there is nothing. And then next to her, another woman who's saying, I see the field of all interpenetrating Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or all the 5 dhyana Buddhas, or the constituent elements of the universe, but they're conscious and alive as gods and goddesses, all merged together, but not exactly merged. I can see them, you know, as 5 different colors, or 5 different, you know, and it's talked about this way. And then you can have a woman next to her who's seeing it. Now I can feel the energy of the goddess throughout nature, and she's seeing all the forms, all the dense forms, but she feels all of the energy. You can call these different forms of awakening. You can call these different states of consciousness. You can call it all of it. But the thing about consciousness itself, Shiva, the container, it's always there. The awareness of each of those states of consciousness, or each of those stages, or whatever you want to call them, however you want to think of them, each of those strata, because they're all happening at once, right? The awareness of those is always the same. It's just awareness. It's just empty clarity. Shiva is just, consciousness is just that. So you're always Shiva, and you're always Shakti in different forms. The Shakti is in different ways. The states of consciousness are different, or the experience of being dense or expanded are different at different times. But you're always the goddess as well. You're always both of them. But the way in which you're always Shiva is unmoving, unchanging. The way in which your consciousness is unmoving, unchanging. And when you speak about witness consciousness, that's in Shakti. That's a subtle form of mind. That's, you know, a wave tuning in and tuning into a little part of the wave that is unmoving and unchanging. And it's saying, oh, this is like the ocean. I'm one with the ocean now. But if the wave just drops its attention 5 or 10 feet down, it never was anything but unmoving and unchanging ocean. It's never anything other than that, always. So in Zen, they call this the sideward step, because it's kind of it's like, it's not going forward. It's like any time along the path, if you want to get off, you go, oh, what's aware of this progression, like where I am right now? It's like, oh, it's consciousness. That's it. Free. It's not something you're going to reach at the end. All you can reach at the end is the seeing that, oh, I'm a character in a movie. That's like very subtle understanding. No characters usually are having that conversation. But if you're like a really, really conscious character in a movie, you're like, whoa, this whole thing is a plot. And I'm actually just light dancing on a screen. Whoa. But the light dancing on a screen doesn't somehow now become, let me put it this way. There's a way in which the light on the screen doesn't suddenly become the screen. You could say it this way. It never can become the screen. That's one way of speaking. There's a way in which that's true. Or you can say this, equally true, maybe more true. The light on the screen was never anything other than the screen. Never could be anything other than the screen. And it recognizing that is nice, but it isn't what made it the screen. It was always the screen. Unaware, it was the screen. Aware, it's the screen. But its awareness doesn't change anything about its fundamental nature. Does that make sense?